Australia, the US and Japan have all imposed sanctions on Russia while India has held back. It has abstained in both the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly on votes condemning the invasion. It was unclear whether India would be pushed to do more by the other three Quad members, although a source said that was not the purpose of the forum. India's ties with Russia go back to the 1960s, when the former Soviet Union became one of its major arms suppliers. China also abstained on the UN votes. And while Beijing has been criticized for not using its influence to restrain Russian President Vladimir Putin, it has begun to distance itself from Moscow's adventurism. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told his Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Kuleba on Wednesday that China was deeply grieved by the war and supported peace talks. Mr. Kuleba asked China to help mediate a ceasefire. Russia claims port city of Kherson. The Quad meeting comes as Russia continued its assault on Ukraine, saying it had seized the Black Sea port city of Kherson, although that claim was challenged. Kherson's mayor said Russian forces had entered the city and even visited him in the administrative building, where he had asked them not to shoot civilians. But the Ukrainian government on Thursday morning maintained troops were still fighting in the city of 250,000 people, while the Pentagon said its intelligence pointed to the city remaining contested. Russian forces have encircled another port city, Mariupol, and cut off power and water, while they continued to bombard the second biggest city of Kharkiv, as well as land paratroopers to begin a street-by-street assault. Shelling of the capital Kiev also continued, but a 65-kilometer-long convoy of Russian tanks and trucks outside the city was still making little progress towards its objective, hampered by a lack of fuel and food. Apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, universities, churches and Kiev's railway station are among the civilian buildings that have been hit. In the first Russian acknowledgement of casualties, the Defense Ministry said 498 Russian troops had been in 1597 had been wounded, repudiating Ukraine's claims the invaders had suffered incalculable losses. Ukraine has claimed it has 6,000 Russians, and, in a propaganda move, filmed videos of captured Russian soldiers admitting the war was a mistake. As fighting raged on, Western countries continued to isolate Russia economically and diplomatically. Mr. Biden said nothing is off the table on sanctions, and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson told his MPs that the vice is tightening on the Putin regime and will continue to tighten. In the first American strike against Russia's oil and gas industry, the White House announced it would impose export controls on drilling and refining equipment in an attempt to nobble the income the sector generates for Moscow long term. The United States and our allies and partners do not have a strategic interest in reducing the global supply of energy, which is why we have carved out energy payments from our financial sanctions, a White House statement said. But we and our allies and partners share a strong interest in degrading Russia's status as a leading energy supplier over time. Chinese firms caught in sanctions net. Energy analyst Neil Beveridge said there would be an impact on Russian operations from the ban, although the extent would depend on whether Chinese companies operating in Russia were caught in the sanctions net. Areas such as refining and deep water drilling equipment could be impacted. For conventional onshore drilling, there are alternatives from China, he said. Russia's pariah status was further confirmed after 141 of the 193 UN members, including Australia, backed a General Assembly resolution condemning the invasion, with 35 abstentions and just 5 voting against. It was the first time in 4 decades that the smaller UN Security Council, where Russia has permanent membership and a veto, has referred a crisis to the General Assembly. Moscow's supporters were Belarus, Eritrea, North Korea and Syria. The abstentions included Bangladesh, China, India, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, South Africa, Laos, Vietnam and a collection of African, Central American and Central Asian states. Australia also joined 37 other countries to refer Russia to the International Criminal Court for a war crimes investigation. According to the UN, 752 civilians have been confirmed since the attack, although Ukrainian officials said there had been 2,000 casualties. The UN warned the war could produce the biggest refugee crisis of this century, after more than 1 million Ukrainians had fled since fighting broke out a week ago. It forecasts as many as 4 million people could be displaced. Amid fears of the risk of war escalating, the US moved to diffuse tensions by announcing it was postponing a nuclear missile launch test to avoid it being misconstrued after Mr. Putin ordered Russian nuclear forces to a higher order of alert earlier this week. We did not take this decision lightly, but instead, to demonstrate that we are a responsible nuclear power, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said. Meanwhile, Sweden scrambled its air force after 4 Russian fighter jets briefly violated Swedish airspace.